Thank you. This meeting of Parliament resumes. As Presiding Officer, I expect government announcements on important policy issues to be made to the Parliament in the first instance. I was therefore concerned to discover this morning that the First Minister was making a statement to the media on Scotland's place in Europe. Members of the media therefore had the opportunity to question the First Minister on the document before members of the Parliament. The Bureau considered this at its meeting today and has agreed to consider the broader issues of announcements to Parliament in the new year. However, the Minister for Parliamentary Business wishes to update Parliament on this afternoon's statement. Minister.
Sir, isn't a change of business. I think it's appropriate to take this opportunity to inform the Chamber that the First Minister will give the statement this afternoon on Scotland's place in Europe.
Thank you very much. We now turn to the next item of business, which is topical questions. And the first question is from Neil Findlay.
To ask the Scottish Government, how many women have had transvaginal mesh implants since it requested NHS boards to suspend their use in June 2014?
Cabinet Secretary Shona Robertson.
The independent review on transvaginal mesh implants is in the process of producing its final report. The report will be published early in the new year and will contain the information asked for. The Scottish Government has made clear that health boards should consider suspending the use of synthetic mesh products in surgery for pelvic organ prolapse and stress urinary incontinence until the review makes its final report. The request to suspend procedures will remain until the independent review's recommendations have been put in place. In light of the Scottish Government's request, the number of women receiving mesh implants has fallen. However, if women are experiencing very distressing symptoms and still want to proceed, then I'd want to give my reassurance that prior to a decision to have a mesh implant, all clinicians are expected to have a detailed discussion with their patients, with the risks explored and explained, so that a shared decision can be made and fully informed consent taken. I should also stress that any woman who has concerns about her implant should call the NHS helpline, which was specially set up last year, or alternatively should not hesitate to contact her GP or surgeon.
Neil Findlay.
Organ damage, loss of kidney, bladder removal, excruciating constant chronic pain, pelvic inflammation, pierced vaginal wall, nerve damage, mental breakdown, a reliance on wheelchairs and walking aids, husbands and partners injured during intercourse, and family and marital breakdown. Just some of the devastating life-changing consequences experienced by women who have been implanted with transvaginal mesh and failed by some health boards, some health professionals, the MHRA and manufacturers whose arrogance and complacency on mesh has been startling. Now we find, according to the media, another 400 Scottish women have been implanted since the so-called Scottish suspension in 2014. What message does the Cabinet Secretary have for these women? And will she now make it clear to NHS boards that it should follow the line of some health boards and ensure that no other women are fitted with mesh, pending the findings of the Government's working group?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as Neil Findlay will be aware, the Scottish Government has no authority to withdraw these products. That is the role of the MHRA, and they have not done so. The Scottish Government knows of 9 health boards that have carried out the stress urinary incontinence procedures. And of course, as I explained in my first answer, and as we said way back at the beginning, and I think I said at the Health Committee at the time, that if women wanted to go ahead with these procedures, then in full consultation with their clinician, with absolute clarity and information about the risks, then a woman could still make an informed decision to do so. That is a discussion between the woman and her clinician. That has been clear all the way through this process. Now, I would hope that Neil Findlay, as I said in my initial answer, will welcome the independent review being published early in the new year. I think we need to wait and see what it says. But meantime, it's very important that women are fully informed of the risks. And as I said, if any woman has concerns, they should phone the NHS helpline, which again was specifically set up last year, in consultation with some of the patient group who I've met with on a number of occasions, who Neil Findlay has also met with, who have been extremely helpful in making sure that we can get to a position where that full information is given to women so that they can make an informed choice about whether or not they would go ahead with a procedure.
Neil Findlay.
Given what we know about mesh, given all the complications that have been highlighted, would the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that it is not a procedure that she or I would recommend someone getting?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as I said, it is not a banned product or procedure. The Scottish Government has no authority to withdraw the products involved. The MHRA has not done so. And therefore, it's important that the information that clinicians give to women who are in this position and who may be considering having the procedure, that they are fully informed of the risks. That is the proper way to proceed. Now, obviously, we are waiting for the independent review on transvaginal mesh implants. That is coming in the new year. Once we get that information, I would be happy to meet with Neil Findlay and indeed meet again with the patient group who, as I said earlier, have been extremely helpful in this process in making sure women have the right information, and they were the ones who asked for the helpline which we set up. And it's very, very important that women make an informed decision. These are decisions not taken lightly, but as I said in my initial answer, where women are experiencing very distressing symptoms and still want to proceed, then it's very, very important they do so with informed consent, and that is what has been put in place, and the Chief Medical Officer has been making sure that that is the case.
Jackson Carlo.
Because of the issues that we're discussing, we've tended to talk about these in the most careful tones. But in the Australian Parliament last month, Senator Darren Hinch gave an absolutely blistering speech in which he lambasted the medical watchdogs and manufacturers for once again letting down women. He compared the scandal of mesh implants to thalidomide. And I include the MHRA. I know they're a UK body, but when we took evidence from them in the Petitions Committee, it turned out that their detailed analysis amounted to 3 postgraduate students doing a desk talk exercise for 2 weeks at a cost of £20,000. We all in this Parliament welcomed the Scottish Government moratorium when it was announced. Many health boards have respected that moratorium. Can we conclude other than that those health boards who have not have willfully acted, putting women's lives at risk?
Cabinet Secretary.
I don't think that is fair. I noted what Jackson Carlos said about HMRA, and he will be aware, of course, that on at least 2 occasions now, I have written to MHRA making clear some of the very strong views that have been expressed in this Parliament about their role as the regulator. However, we can't get away from the fact that it is the job of the MHRA to regulate medical devices across the UK, and that so far they have not issued a medical device alert regarding the implants concerned. That means, therefore, that the Scottish Government doesn't have the authority to withdraw these products. That lies with the MHRA. So we find ourselves in the position we find ourselves in, which is why, of course, Alec Neil issued the guidance that he issued and that I have supported, but all along making very clear that where a woman decides in full consultation with her clinician that despite all of the risks that have been explained to her, she still wants to go ahead with the procedure because of the very distressing symptoms that she may be experiencing, that that is a situation that had to be allowed to go ahead because it was an agreement between the clinician and the women involved. So again, as I said to Neil Findlay, it's important that we get the independent review in the new year, and I would be happy to meet with Jackson Carlo as well to discuss the findings and recommendations of that report once we get it.
And Elaine Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Having listened to Cabinet Secretary's response to colleagues, could I ask the Cabinet Secretary if she's confident that all of the women who have been fitted with this mesh since the moratorium in 2014 have agreed to this procedure after being fully informed of the many and often horrendous risks of the procedure? Have all of them been fully informed?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the Chief Medical Officer had made it very clear at the time, and when the Chief Medical Officer and I appeared in front of the Health Committee at that time, what was made very, very clear is that women would require to be fully informed of the risks of the procedure. Now, that is exactly what I would expect every clinician to do. And if Elaine Smith or anyone else has any evidence that has not been happening, then I would be very concerned about that, because the Chief Medical Officer was very clear in her guidance to clinicians that that is what should happen in every case, so that women would be making informed decisions. So if Elaine Smith has evidence to the contrary of that, I would want to know about that.
Question number 2, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government for what reason it has downgraded its forecast of revenues from the residential element of lands and buildings transaction tax.
Cabinet Secretary Derek Mackay.
Forecast tax receipts from residential LBTT and equivalent taxes elsewhere in the UK are regularly reviewed in light of new data and improvements in methodology. The 17-18 budget forecasts of residential LBTT for the next 4 years are lower than in the 16-17 budget, in part because of the wider economic trends over the past 12 months. Forecasts for LBTT, published for the 17-18 draft budget, have been independently scrutinised and approved by the Scottish Fiscal Commission. LBTT is forecast to raise more than £2.2 billion over 4 years, of which the residential element will raise more than £1.2 billion.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response? The Office for Budget Responsibility has estimated that the take from stamp duty land tax in the rest of the UK is likely to fall by 5% over the next 3 years. The Scottish Government predicts that LBTT receipts residential in Scotland for the same period are likely to fall by some 46%. Given that this represents a figure of some £833 million potentially lost to the public finances, why didn't the Scottish Government listen to all the property experts who warned them at the time that in setting the rates too high, they would depress activity in the property market and therefore reduce the tax take? And will they now reconsider the level of tax rates?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I have to say that Murdo Fraser has been consistently wrong on LBTT. In the previous financial year, we actually generated more resource than was forecast. It's the nature of economic forecasts to give us a range. But in terms of the OBR, what they've said about this particular tax in UK equivalent, stamp duty land tax, SDLT, is one of the more volatile sources of receipts. In recent years, SDLT's receipts have been a large source of fiscal forecasting errors. In line with that, we have revised our SDLT forecast proportionately more than any other major tax. And I have to say that the LBTT in Scotland has been operating well. Don't just take my word for it, take the Finance Committee's word for it, on which Murdo Fraser's a member.
Murdo Fraser.
Well, thanks to the Cabinet Secretary. Of course, what the Finance Committee was saying was the operation of the system has been working well, not that the tax take was in line with expectations. And as he knows, for the first year, residential tax take from LBTT was £32 million below originally predicted. But he doesn't just need to listen to us, Presiding Officer. Why doesn't he listen to the First Minister's hand-picked chair of her Growth Commission, Andrew Wilson, who accepts the link between the rates of LBTT and the low and falling tax take? But perhaps the Cabinet Secretary can tell us, given that we are now facing £750 million less for the public finances than we were expecting under LBTT, which public services are going to be cut as a result of his government's incompetence?
Cabinet Secretary.
I say again that I've engaged with stakeholders and experts in the field, and I would challenge what Murdo Fraser is saying around the composition of the tax. I think it should be welcomed that over 90% of people who are purchasing properties are paying no tax or less tax than they would under the previous regime. I think there is economic growth, but our forecasts have been laid out clearly in our methodology document. But of course, we'll keep an analysis of that and monitor the housing market. But Mr Fraser will also know that there is no evidence of distortion in the market, as again even the Finance Committee agreed with. So it is the case. We'll monitor the position, ensure that we're properly funding our public services, and we'll refine the tax rates as required, and it will be evidence-based. But all the evidence to date has said that the system is operating well, and some of the financial impacts that we face are a consequence of the economic situation.
And briefly, Ivan McKee.
Thank you. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that despite the dire predictions from the Conservatives prior to its introduction, the outturn data for LBTT shows that the number of transactions in all price bands, taking into account the effect of forestalling, has continued to increase year on year? In fact, the number of transactions in the highest property bands has increased strongly, showing the decision to ask those in the most expensive properties to pay a bit more in property transactions to help fund public services was the correct decision.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it certainly is the case that the outturn figures have showed that LBTT raised £425 million in 2015-16 compared to our original pre-forestalling forecast of £381 million. And it is a fair question and a fair point to say, look at the nature and the composition of the transactions to see what's happening in the market, and I'll commit to continue to do that to make sure that the tax system is having the right effects. But it is the case that the composition is largely unchanged in terms of the transactions as it was before LBTT.
Thank you. That concludes